Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues and audience. Welcome to this very important session of the World Bank 2020 Fragility Forum, which will look at the impact of war on development in Yemen from data to practice. It's the second part of a two-part series, and we're going to be having a very promising evidence-based discourse around the impact of Yemen's protracted conflict on the development outcomes in Yemen. I'm very honored and privileged to be moderating a panel with a very seasoned group of panelists representing institutions in Yemen and also international partners. I will introduce them shortly, and I also want to encourage you to use the chat to ask any questions to the panelists that you might have. So we had part one with Jonathan Moyer, where he presented some UNDP commissioned research which really highlighted what the incredible negative impact is of the protracted conflict in Yemen, not only on humanitarian outcomes, but also on developmental dimensions, including the SDGs. What we want to do today, with the help of the panel, is to have a follow-up discussion around project interventions and approaches that can help communities not only cope with crisis, but also recover in a sustainable manner. And I'm very excited in that context to be joined by three panelists. The first one is Lamis Al-Iryani. She is the head of the Monitoring and Evaluation Unit of the Social Fund for Development. The Social Fund for Development is a very important institution in Yemen, and she's been with them since 1998. She's led major program evaluations, strategic planning processes, and I really look forward to hearing from her about the situation on the ground in Yemen and what more we can do. The second panelist is Auke Lootsma, the resident representative for UNDP, who is also quite familiar with Yemen and has been there for several years now. He's worked with UNDP since '94, and he was previously the country director in Rwanda, and he also spent time in Ukraine, Sudan, Uganda, among other countries. Last but not least, we have Marie Tertsunen, the country director of GIZ Yemen since August 2018. She's worked in development cooperation for 20 years with both UNDP and GIZ. And I think with this particular panel, we have a very exciting group of representatives, because as we will discuss today, having positive results in Yemen requires innovative partnerships. So with that, let me encourage you one more time to really post any questions on the chat that you might have. What I'm going to do in the meantime, while your questions come in, I'm going to ask an initial question to each of the panelists. And Lamis, let me start with you, if I may. And I look forward to hearing from you maybe for about 4 or 5 minutes. So Lamis, we read a lot about the situation in Yemen, which was already extremely difficult before the COVID pandemic hit, but now it's seems to be really tragic beyond words. I'd like to hear from you, what is SFD doing? How is SFD managing to cope with this very difficult situation on the ground? How is it managing to make a difference? And any thoughts you might have on what more we can do going forward to really help the people in Yemen through these dire times. Lamis, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Marina. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the World Bank and for the UNDP for hosting this meeting and for giving me the space to speak in this event. COVID-19 has greatly impacted Yemenis in many ways. It has caused mortalities, loss of livelihoods, increase of food prices, and have reduced remittances, which is a key source of income for many Yemenis. Findings from recent SFD monitoring visits conducted for completed projects informed us that many of those who we interviewed in 380 project locations are aware of COVID-19. They have different levels of awareness, but they are all agree that the pandemic has affected their already stressed livelihoods. In areas where many families depend on receiving remittances from abroad, such as part in Hajjah Governorate or certain part of Eb, they told us that the remittances have been reduced or even cut off. Those who are dependent on working in urban areas, they told us that they were not able to go back to work as a daily wagers, and sometimes due to closures of businesses or a result of road closures. We can say that Yemenis are more exposed to pandemic and diseases because of shortages of food, limited accessibility to clean water, to practice frequent hand washing and hygiene. Even the nature of informal jobs Yemenis have don't give them the option of staying at home, let alone the conflict, displacement, and the limited social protection mechanisms. To note that COVID-19 is not the last devastating event hit Yemen. Yemen just recently experienced heavy rain and severe flooding across the country, leaving 135 deaths and the destruction of roads, houses, and the loss of livelihoods. Yemeni have been going from one crisis to another, and in many times they have no option just to resort to negative coping strategies. They sleep hungry and they don't have the means to seek treatment. But there is an action and response. Since the start of the war, SFD has been focusing on delivering cash-based support through the cash for work, cash for nutrition, and support to the SMEs. During the last 5 years of war, with support from donors, from the World Bank, through the UNDP and other donors, SFD has reached more than 400,000 households. This is close to 10% of the population of Yemen. SFD support hasn't been limited to providing just temporary jobs or just support mothers to reach nutritional treatments, but also it involved creating community assets, transferring knowledge, and generating development outcomes. Just to give you an example, we visited Mrs. Fatma this month. She lives in Hajjah. She didn't only receive or benefit from the system that she built a year ago close to her house, providing her with an improved source of water, but also she bought 2 goats from savings she made participating in the cash for work projects while building the system, the project system. She told us that the water tank has made her life easier and that she breeds more goats, and she just sold one to meet her family needs during the past Eid. This is about 3 weeks ago. The evaluation has provided SFD and its donors a consistent findings of the effectiveness of the cash transfer, either through the cash for work or the cash for nutrition. And that it works particularly when we are working closely with communities, responding to their needs, and when the amount of transfer is sufficient. Similarly, the support to the SMEs allow them to sustain their businesses and even to grow. with better business practices and to support the livelihoods of thousands of Yemenis. I would like here to stress that even with the interventions of SFD and other key national and international partners, all these interventions is not enough compared to the catastrophic conditions that Yemenis live in. Support to Yemenis should be linked to development and linked to the restoration of livelihoods and services, as Yemenis deserve dignity and better future. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Lamis, and thank you for the amazing work that you and SFD do under really the most difficult of circumstances, making incredible differences in people's lives. It is so heartbreaking to see what Yemenis have been through, even in the past few months. You mentioned the recent floods, the COVID pandemic, and how stressed the health system already was. It's a very difficult situation, and interventions like Cash for Work are really critical, not only in bringing liquidity to households, but also in generating jobs, and really appreciate the role SFD is playing in this. Auke, as we are discussing, in Yemen right now, the needs are huge and they're urgent. What is the response to this of a development agency like UNDP? How is it responding to the ongoing conflict and to the pandemic? And how are you working with partners to jointly respond to the many challenges? Over to you.
Many thanks, Marina. And let me start off by making a reference to the impact of war reports that you also referred to in your introduction. I think the reports make a very powerful argument that Yemen, which is widely known to be the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, is also the worst development crisis in the world. And it backs that statement up with some evidence that is set out in the report. I'll just give a few examples here. The report calculates that now more than 4 years or 5 years of conflict in Yemen has set back development by 21 years. If war is to continue, if the conflict is prolonged, it may end up, let's say if you use the year 2022, development will be set back by 26 years. And if we use the SDGs benchmark of 2030 and war would be to continue, we would end up with a development setback of almost 4 decades. So the challenges for a development agency on the ground are obviously huge. The conflict has resulted over 24 million out of the 30 million people population in need. This number includes also over 12 million children. If you look at the food security situation, we see that the situation is actually getting worse, and we have now about 3.2 million people who are added to the caseload that we have in need of food assistance. Looking at some of the health components, and I'm not even talking about COVID yet, since January 2018, we've had over 1.4 million cholera cases. And as I mentioned, now with COVID on top, and Lamis mentioned that as well, it's yet another crisis on top of a crisis. Now, coming to the point of your question, I think it is obvious that development can't wait in a country like Yemen. It is evidenced by our work on the ground. The development action during the conflict is also possible. And surely, also as part of the whole nexus, humanitarian development nexus, we don't want to wait for the war to end and for the humanitarians to finish before we start doing our work as well, right? So even under the most difficult circumstances, what we try to do is to strive to leave no country behind in terms of making progress one way or another towards the SDGs. Although it is different to alter the trajectory at the moment, the development trajectory of Yemen, and this is also evidenced in the reports that we talked about at the outset, we can't slow down the regression of the development pathway that Yemen is experiencing at the moment. And I think this is what is evidenced currently on the ground. As UNDP, what do we focus on? Well, we are looking at food security and social protection, mainly through cash for work programs that Lamis also talked about. We're looking at rehabilitation of infrastructure, renewable energy, water management, and also we're working with a lot of local institutions for service delivery. And these are sort of our key points that we work on at the moment. Now, just to finish up here, I think one important message that comes through from the report that I'd like to repeat here as well is to say that, you know, without an end to the conflict, it will be very difficult for us to really make some big steps, some quantum leaps, you know, for Yemen to get back on a positive development trajectory. So, you know, we really urge all the parties involved in this to heed the call of the report and sit around the table and come up with a political settlement. Let me stop here.
Thank you so much, Auke. Very, very powerful messages. Even in the midst of a humanitarian crisis, I hear you say development can't wait, and we also have a development crisis to deal with. And it's critical that we work with partners and with local institutions to address that and to really focus on that. I think that's an extremely powerful message that we will come back to. Let me move on to Marie. Marie, the international support to Yemen to help deal with the various crises is absolutely critical. To make a change from the ground, it's really essential to partner with local stakeholders, organizations, communities, and also the private sector. So I'd be interested from where you sit, how can local actors really play a role in assisting the recovery from the bottom up? And given your experience at GIZ and in development more broadly, how do you see this situation? Over to you, Marie.
Thank you, Marina, at first for this opportunity to participate in this exchange and discussion. The expectations regarding recovery and especially in the sustainable manner, like Auke already highlighted, should be kept very modest in the current situation. Without peace and regular income for Yemeni households, without revenues or commitment of the governing authorities, both recovery and the sustainable manner cannot materialize. Clearly, the development and improvement cannot be externally driven. There must be a strong commitment existing in the country. And, but also in this situation of this war-torn country, some interventions and also foreign support can be successful. You mentioned different local stakeholders, and surely they all play a very crucial role in internally driven country-led processes. Let me first highlight the importance of maintaining and stabilizing and possibly even strengthening the capacities of local authorities and local administration. Here, both structures have an important role to play, the deconcentrated units of sector ministries, but also the once elected councils. Developing their institutional capacities and human capacities is in focus of our approaches as GIZ. Second, communities and civil society, organized or not organized in NGOs and different initiatives, have taken over some responsibilities of public sector institutions in coping with the situation and assisting the population. For example, supporting measures and initiatives to ensure access of internally displaced persons, IDPs, to basic services like education, health, or water and sanitation in the communities they now live, surely can make a difference. And it also improves the social cohesion and chances for peaceful coexistence. Third, you mentioned the local private sector. Due to the weak public service provision, which was mentioned by Auke as well, the role of the private sector is crucial. For example, in providing electricity, especially solar energy, but also in providing private health services. Currently in COVID, we see this role. We qualify in one project, we qualify and train young men and women to install and maintain solar panels. And some of you might know that the lack of energy supply led to the closure of many companies and firms in Yemen. So even small-scale support and small and micro enterprises like the ones maintaining solar panels, but also motorcycle repair shops, mobile phone repair shops, hairdressers, etc., are very important employers for local youth. And ensuring employment means economic recovery on a household level. Access to finance is challenging for private enterprises, especially for the small ones. So we also develop capacities of microfinance institutions to offer financial services. Fourth, all these stakeholders, actors you mentioned, I think one of the successful approaches we have been using as a GIZ is to support joint measures of these different stakeholders to enhance and improve the joint measures of the different stakeholders it is important because the NGOs or initiatives, they should not start parallel systems or they should not be working in a vacuum. In our opinion, it's very important that they work together with responsible local authorities that also enhances the sustainability of the measures we support. Marina, in the very beginning, in the introduction, you also asked for tangible examples of interventions that help communities and households to cope with this crisis. So in one qualitative survey of perceptions and perspectives of partners and target groups of our education project recently, the respondents expressed, among other things, following strengths and positive changes they experienced. The education project effectively implemented a high quality and inclusive approach, which encompassed the entire educational pyramid. The support was needs oriented. I think this is very important and grounded in reality. The project successfully assisted schools in keeping operations going during the war. Even that is success nowadays. Decreased dropout rates and reduced absenteeism among students was observed, and community resources were successfully mobilized to support school operations. The father-mother councils were reactivated and community participation and contributions were mobilized, including successful appeals for donations, despite the fact that salaries and wages have not been paid in the most northern governorate since October 2016. The committed communities themselves can make a change from the ground, and our role mostly is to support them in their own initiatives. That is how we currently work there.
Mari, thank you very much for this rich and passionate intervention. And I also, among other things, really appreciate the emphasis you're putting on the private sector. I think even in the most difficult of circumstances faced in Yemen, the private sector is remaining resilient. And on the side of the World Bank, that is something we also want to try to support further going forward. As many of you know, the World Bank has recently also finalized a new strategy for engagement in fragile and conflict-affected states. And of course, the work we're doing in Yemen is really core to that strategy. And I think it's amazing to hear the partnerships around the table and how together we can make a small positive difference under these extremely difficult circumstances. As World Bank Director for Yemen, I feel very proud of that, and I really want to thank you all for the partnership, which I hope we will be able to continue to take to new heights. Now, I'm going to proceed with the second round of questions so that we can delve a little bit deeper into some of the important issues that have been raised. So I think it was Auke who already mentioned that without an end to the conflict, it will be very difficult for Yemen to reach its full potential and to make the maximum impact on the developmental side. And a political solution would be critically important. So Lamis, if I may turn to you again, to get Yemen back on a sustainable path of development, progress, and reviving the peace process would be absolutely critical. COVID-19 is impacting everything around the world, including in Yemen. So how do you see the situation? What kind of peace agreement should we be working towards, and would help also an institution like SFD to really deliver its services most effectively?
Thank you, Marina, again. As it should be known that people with better economic opportunities are more likely to sustain and maintain peace. So creating more livelihoods opportunities for Yemeni would encourage people to push for peace settlement. In SFD, we just like 2 years ago, 1 year and a half ago, carried out with FBRI a study on the impact of youth employment program that is supported by the World Bank and other donors. The study found that providing capacity building, encouraging youth networking, and providing job opportunities have increased trust among youth. Increased trust among youth groups from different regions in Yemen, from south, north, east, and west, even with all the differences and the conflict currently, creating an opportunities for youth and bring them together can build trust. Trust among them and trust even among their leaders, local leaders and politicians. So increase their hopes and optimism about their employability. So investing in youth and creating opportunities is crucial for paving the way for peace. To add to that we observed from the SFD community-based initiatives programs, which is called Tamkeen, has established a spirit of mutual cooperation and understanding and mobilization towards collective self-help and development. This is a fast-spreading program that encourages social cohesion and prevention of conflict among the community groups. So just to say again that creating opportunities for youth, bringing community together is going to push for peace and to sustain once it happens. Thank you, back to you.
Thank you so much. And your message on creating opportunities for youth and livelihoods is a very strong one. And I think one of the main messages that is coming through in this session. So thank you very much. Marie, if I may go to you next. The conflict has not only reversed development indicators, It has also impacted relationships and dynamics among communities, between them and the authorities. You already alluded to some of this, with a lack of confidence in some of the mechanisms and institutions under the current circumstances. I think in this context, the emphasis on service delivery that a number of the panelists have mentioned is absolutely critical. I'd like to hear from you. What can we do to improve the population's living conditions, and importantly, to increase accountability and trust in the structures in Yemen? Marie, over to you.
Thank you. This is quite a tricky one. Yemen has actually never had very strong trust or dependency on formal state structures. In my view, the tribal and traditional, as well as religious norms and rules are much more important than much more relevant than the public sector or state institutions and that kind of laws and regulations. Especially the tribal leaders, I think they have a unique level of legitimacy in a Yemeni society. Also, there is no one state existing currently, so the state institutions are quite difficult to define. We have in Yemen very fragmented governing and public structures, as we all know, based on the current conflict situation. To increase trust, accountability, surely the easiest way might be on the local level, where the public social services are directly needed and felt by the population if they exist, or especially if they are missing. So keep operations going, basic social services delivery, and also increase access to those basic social services. Stabilize, strengthen local institutions, I already mentioned in the first question. And to increase trust, I think strengthening local participation would be very important to support and ensure that public entities, administrations involve and participate local interest groups and local population and households in their planning or implementation of any kind of development or rehabilitation measures. To allow for contribution from non-state actors and stakeholders. This is still not the normality in Yemen. And also promote joint measures and joint selection of measures to be implemented, needs-based measures, especially if now more support is coming in. It's very important that they are demand-driven and not like a parallel system. To promote transparency, very important. And maybe when those measures are jointly conducted, then celebrate also the accomplishment of measures, show result. One issue is to avoid any contradicting effects. This is something that can happen. Aid should never replace or substitute public service delivery or public investments. And we can currently see it in the war situation in Yemen. If the trust on foreign aid increases, the trust and reliability on in-country systems would decrease. So the relevance and role of governing and state services should not deteriorate. So we have to be very careful in our initiatives to avoid any kind of contradicting things. You had two questions in your question. So the part to improve living conditions, this is also a very challenging one, because one can use short-term, medium-term, or long-term approaches. The first thing was already mentioned, to stop the war. I think stopping the war would improve living conditions of the population immediately. But also, like Lamis said just a few minutes ago, to improve the productive livelihoods of vulnerable households, to involve the members of local households in the rehabilitation measures, recovery measures, like cash for work, that was mentioned already, but also to train and develop human capacities, say farmer groups, support non-farm livelihood activities, home gardens, improved seeds, beekeeping. Those are things we have been supporting in Yemen in the recent years. Ensure income and employment. So if somebody asked me to make a policy, make a strategy for Yemen for the near future, what would be the priorities? I would say triple E. I would focus on education. We can't afford a lost generation. Ensuring smooth transit to employment. So any kind of income opportunities for youth, but also for anybody, especially women and youth. And the third E would be energy supply. So keeping in mind that the whole energy supply system has collapsed and the most private sector companies closed because of this fact. I think the third E would be energy supply, simultaneously maintaining the basic social services. One cannot survive without water and sanitation or health services. And integrating and making sure that the internally displaced persons are participating in the host communities. It's almost 4 million IDPs we currently have in Yemen. So it's a big part of population. And last but not least, allowing and sharing the involvement and contributions of women in economic affairs and political and social affairs. It's more than half of the society. It's amazing resources Yemen has in the women and girls of that country. So underutilizing that resource would be a mistake. And the sustainable development would not be possible without participation of women in all aspects and affairs of the society. Maybe I'll leave it there, and looking forward to further questions coming.
Thank you, Mike. And I hear your messages. Stop the war, focus on productive employment, productive livelihoods, bringing in the role of the private sector, and like you mentioned, really unlocking the full potential of women in Yemen who have so much to contribute economically and to society as well. So very strong messages. I just also want to remind everybody, if you have any follow-up questions for our renowned panelists, please do put them in the chat, and we will try to get to them very shortly. Auke, I would like to go back to you, and also to pick up on the point you made earlier, that it's of critical importance at this juncture that we continue development work during the conflict to help prevent further deterioration. In the midst of the pandemic, it is also becoming evident that the socioeconomic impact of COVID will exceed the health impact, that it will have a much broader impact. So how is that impacting your thinking as UNDP in Yemen, and what could and should an integrated response package look like? I realize it's a huge question, but I think we'd be very grateful for your thoughts on that. Over to you.
Yes, thank you, Marina. And certainly I don't have all the answers that I can tell you off the bat, but Let me just here start off by saying that I've been witnessing the impact of the pandemic at first hand. I spent the last couple of months in Aden, as a matter of fact, seeing what impact it had on the population and the institutions, which are already massively weakened by the conflict itself, as well as also a whole series of natural disasters. We had a flooding in Aden as well at the same time, which are all adding to the casualties as they were mounting day by day. Basically, what we can also say is that besides the direct and the indirect effects of the pandemic itself, the global crisis also produced two other massive shocks to Yemen. And one is the collapse of the humanitarian support. We expect that probably the amount available for humanitarian is probably 2/3 less than the year before in 2019, plus also a sharp deterioration of fiscal and external accounts of Yemen. And both then severely threaten the availability of food and fuel, absolute necessities, but also further weaken the ability of the authorities to deliver basic services all throughout Yemen. So in Yemen, therefore, your COVID-19 poses really unique health risks that could really lead to even a further catastrophic situation where no one is safe. And the most vulnerable will be probably, and most likely, I would say, the hardest hit. If we look at some of the modeling that has been done globally, we are using ourselves in the UN, the Imperial College model projections. And if you look at the strategy of no mitigation, which is currently more or less the case in Yemen, and we follow the most likely scenario here, the model predicts that about 80% of the population will become infected with COVID-19. I just repeated for emphasis, 86%, right? Which will result in more than 400,000 hospitalizations and over 60,000 deaths. Now, this is certain to create huge problems because the ongoing conflict has already decimated a very weak health system, and a massive outbreak or a second spike as we have progressed along the curve will probably rapidly overwhelm the hospitals and the other facilities that deal with COVID patients. Not only affecting people who have contracted COVID, but also affecting any other patient who requires health service in the country. Second point here is if you look at malnutrition is rampant and is also affecting people's vulnerability and to become further affected or by multiple infectious disease outbreaks. As is the case in many other developing countries, social distancing and good hygiene is sometimes difficult in Yemen, particularly in the IDP camps that also Mari was referring to. And finally, also the virus, of course, also creates new impediments that will affect the delivery of urgent needs and goods and services that are supposed to be provided in the country. Now, this is on the health side, right? If you look at the socioeconomic impact, it is also evident that Yemen is experiencing a very severe economic downturn. The IMF is predicting a 3% downturn on the GDP level. And this on top of many years in succession where GDP has already been going down. So just further contributing to the economic misery in the country. And this downward pressure basically comes from two different sources, internal and external. First is the international decline of the oil price, which is also affecting Yemen as they're still exporting some oil. But also foreign exchange has been affected by the dramatic reduction in remittances that are being sent into the country. So, which is in turn also having an effect directly on people in the country, is also something that Lamis mentioned as well. So within the UN, and I'll come to the point here, Marina, is that within the UN, we have divided it up in two major strands. One is the emergency health response, which is under the leadership of the World Health Organization, which is essentially having a three-pronged strategy, looking at suppression, supplies, and saving lives of patients through COVID centers and district hospitals. And then on the socioeconomic side, we have a 5-point plan that we try to rally the authorities, but also the international community around, which is looking at, one, protecting the existing health system, the remaining health system, protecting people, and we're talking mainly about social protection here, protection of livelihood and jobs. I think Mari already explained the importance of all of that. Safeguarding the economy is something that we look forward to working with the IFIs, with the World Bank and the IMF on, because this is going to be crucial, of course, for any kind of recovery from COVID and other issues in Yemen, particularly when it comes to stabilizing the exchange rate and making sure the central bank will continue to function. And then finally, we're also looking at how we can support social cohesion within this overall framework. So what we call the socioeconomic framework is something that is still under development. We hope to finalize the framework by the end of this month. And as I said, we are looking forward to working with all our partners to rally around this so that we can have a comprehensive and cohesive and coherent approach to our response to the impact, the socioeconomic impact of COVID-19 in Yemen. So let me stop here, Marina, for the interest of time, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Auke. Really appreciate those thoughts, and hearing the different contributions. I think it's also clear how closely the partners need to work together in the context of Yemen to try to achieve development results, to support institutions in a context of active conflict. The World Bank is also updating its strategy for Yemen in the light of COVID and in the light of some of the recent developments. Of course, the immediate health response is critical, and we processed an emergency health operation quickly a few months ago. But going beyond that with a focus on livelihoods, on cash transfers, on cash for work is critical. Of the many outbreaks that Yemen has been facing, of the many crises and challenges that Yemen has been facing, there are also locusts in the country, and we have Yemen to fight the locust outbreak as well, and to ensure sustainable food supplies and sustainable employment opportunities. I want to with one final round of questions, and Lamis, I'm going to go to you first on this, and you're really the one on the ground working under the most difficult of circumstances, and I would like to hear from you, what are some of the biggest challenges that you face? And given security challenges, given COVID, how do you secure the delivery of the work service, of the other services that SFD provides? So this is the final.
Is Marina disconnected?
Marina, I think we lost you. Carolyn?
We can hear Lamis, huh? So
Yeah,
Lamis, if you heard the question, you should
about
continue.
the accessibility of social fund and how to reach different communities. Just let me say that social fund has been working in Yemen since 1997. So it has built a very strong relationship with community groups. And we have been working in the Yemen 22 governorates and the 353 districts. And we have been working directly with communities in a very close partnership with communities and also with local authorities. We have a network of community field workers, or what we call them consultants, who are from the different areas in the country, and they have very good access to the project sites. So our direct relationship with the communities and local authorities has made our accessibility to different areas possible. It is true that we face challenges from time to time, but we are confident that we almost have a very good high-level access to different districts in Yemen, maybe except those who are in direct confrontation or in conflict. The very recent, we collect data on our reach and accessibilities in a monthly basis. The last I've seen that we are being able to access almost 290 districts out of the 353 districts. And this varies from 1 month to another month, because we know that the nature of the conflict here, and sometimes there is a disruption in certain areas. But we are accessing the 22 governorates in Yemen, the majority of the districts. In some districts where there is a conflict, we stop at that moment, but we go back once the conflict is residing. We have seen some districts that it has a chronic conflict and they are a war zone that we were not able to access. Just a few, but certain districts we stop for a few months and we are able to go back. And this is, again, it has to do with our relationship with the communities that built on trust and mutual cooperations for the last 22 years of SFD's operations. We are losing now Marina.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the insights. Really appreciate it. So one of the themes that I hear come out of this discussion very strongly is the emphasis on livelihoods, on economic opportunities, on the role of the private sector, and on making the economic growth process extremely inclusive. Mari mentioned the issue of gender, for instance. This idea of reinforcing the economy, we are also working as one World Bank group with our IFC partners to see what more we can do in this area to really help unlock the full potential of the entrepreneurial and resilient private sector in Yemen. Marie, I'd like to turn to you and ask you, how do you see this link between the reinforcement of the economy and the future of Yemen? We're in a very difficult global environment, not only in Yemen, but also in other countries. I think many of our development partners are quite funding constrained, which is going to be putting more emphasis on selectivity than before. So is the economy really, is it going to stand that higher test, that higher barrier? Should this be one of our priorities? Over to you, Mari.
Thank you, Marina. Yes, I mentioned it earlier on. We conducted a survey we conducted end of last year on local economic potential in promoting peace in Yemen. Found out that access to income and lack of any other opportunities are actually the major reasons why people, especially young men, get involved in the fighting. So not only looking at the situation and recovery after the war, but even currently to make it happen, to end the war and get into the peaceful development, providing other job opportunities is one of the crucial ways of peaceful development. The same survey also found out that international organizations are winning legitimacy. This might be a good thing. This might be also a negative development. We found out in those qualitative discussions that the relationships with international organizations are thought of as critical for accessing income and food. 70% of Yemenis feel that it's easier or somewhat easier to find income or get food if they know someone in an international organization. And this includes non-governmental organizations, humanitarian organizations, all kind of external organizations. So these kind of developments are taking place, and they will have a long-term negative impact if we don't manage to get the employment to increase. That's why I'm so enthusiastic about this topic, Marina.
Thank you, Maria, and it very much also resonates with some of the things we're trying to do together. Auke, I'm going to ask you the final question, and I'm going to try to make this question even harder than the last one that I just asked. As you already outlined, the situation in Yemen is extremely difficult right now, even for a country that has faced many crises. The combination of reduced remittances, lower oil prices, lower jobs, and fiscal pressure among many of the development partners makes for quite a tough outlook going forward. How are you at UNDP and with the partners on the ground? How are you thinking about managing this, and what more can we collectively do to really help the people of Yemen who deserve and need the jobs and the livelihoods so much? I think this is a question that all our partners are asking ourselves. We at the World Bank are asking ourselves this question every day, and in our new strategy, we will be with our partners putting some ideas forward, but I'd be very grateful to hear from you how you see things at this unthinkably difficult juncture for Yemen.
Many thanks, Marina. Indeed, a daunting question, but obviously, like the World Bank and others, we've also spent some time thinking about it. Let me just start off with this one to say that we strongly feel a moral obligation not to let Yemenis down, not now. Now that COVID has hit the country also so hard and with so many other challenges that Yemenis are facing. I think the first thing to remember is also to see that Yemen, of course, is a very big country and it is very diverse, and also in different places we have different challenges to be addressed and to be tackled, right? So a cookie cutter approach in that sense will not work, and therefore within UNDP we've been looking at different regions in Yemen to see how we can tailor our approach to that particular area. And we also feel that dealing with local authorities will help in that regard, also to tailor the response to serve the populations in their particular area of responsibility. So both looking at it from the basic service delivery point of view, but also from the economic livelihood point of view, whereby you may find that in different regions, different livelihood opportunities may pop up, where you face challenges in other places. Let us not forget we have over 40 active front lines. Therefore, there's a lot of insecurity in the country, but it is also true at the same time there are many areas in Yemen where we don't face the same levels of insecurity at all. and therefore also a lot more activity can take place. So I think what is really important here is that one, you know, we do find the funding that is required for these activities. And I already talked about the difficulties we're facing in this area, but also that we continue to forge, to enhance, to strengthen the partnerships that we have in the country. This is both with, you know, between the different institutions we have here on the panel, but also with the local institutions, local partners on the ground, so that really we make this effort as efficient and as tailored as possible. Over to you.
Thank you so much. I think collectively with the local institutions, the private sector, the international partners, the multilateral, the bilateral partners, the UN institutions, and of course the Yemenis, we have a lot of work ahead of us to try to help Yemen secure a better future going forward and livelihoods for all the people of Yemen that they deserve and so much need at this critical juncture and in the midst of the COVID pandemic, which is making for quite a challenging economic and social situation around the world, but in Yemen in particular. So I think the discussion we had today was very important and very critical, but we need to get to action, we need to get back to work, and we really need to take things forward to help the Yemenis who so much deserve our collective support, jointly with local institutions, which will also be a critical key to our own World Bank strategy. It has already been key, but it will become even more critical going forward to leverage all the local institutions have to offer. So thank you very much, Auke, Lamis, really appreciate your attention to this session and your very thoughtful, insightful, grounded, sobering, and inspiring contributions. Thank you so very much, and really appreciate it. Bye-bye.